Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Welburn, and this is Faith Baptist Church Sunday School. We are continuing our study in the Olivet discourse, which is Matthew 24. So if you want to go ahead and be looking in your scripture, Matthew 24, we have been looking at the Olivet discourse over the past 2 weeks, and this will be our third week. We'll also be looking in it next week and the week after that. So continuing Matthew chapter 24. A lot of times whenever people think of prophecy, they think of either Daniel in the Old Testament or a study in the book of Revelation. But Jesus himself gave some really strong prophecy here in Matthew 24 and also in the other four Gospels. But Matthew 24 really has a grand description of what Jesus spoke about, and it gives a lot of detail for us to really pay attention to. So thinking about Christ's return, being aware, as a kid, I would travel, I would ride my bike and travel off in the woods and go to creeks and that sort of thing. I could take the thing off road. It was amazing. And also one of my friends lived across the street, across the main road, and I could travel over there. My dad had incredible volume. And so I knew whenever it was around supper time or time to come home in the evenings, my dad would call out my name and I could hear him. The other thing Dad would do is our house at the time, we had a light mounted way up high in a tree. And if you've ever been to Old Salem and seen the lights up in the trees over at Old Salem, it was very similar to that. So it was pretty high and you could see the light across the main road, and I could see it from my friend's driveway if I went out to the end of the driveway. And so when it was time to come home, especially in the evenings in the summertime, it would stay light until around 9:30. And so Dad would cut that light on, and I knew if I went out and saw that light was on, I knew it was time to head back to the house and be back home. So I think 11 or 12. I was young. And so it was almost like the bat signal, the lights on and that sort of thing. This is way before cell phones. Basically, also I had a wristwatch where I could tell the time and knew what time to be home. But still, Dad had a way of calling me home. And so I knew when I heard his voice, or I knew whenever I saw the light, that it was time to return home. And so Christ's return, we've been looking at, let's go back a little further. Jesus is outside of the temple. He went up on a hill in Jerusalem, and it's the Mount of Olives. It's a large mound, not like a mountain like what we think of with here in North Carolina, Mount Mitchell, those sort of things. It was just a large mound. And so he was at a high place and he was talking to the disciples. And so this is why it's called the Olivet Discourse, Mount of Olives. So Jesus is speaking to the disciples. He'd already covered the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, what was going to happen as far as prophecy. And roughly 40 years later, this temple was going to be destroyed, all the stones turned upside down. And then he talked about what was going to happen during the tribulation, how awful things would get, and how the elect, the people that would be the believers, would be there through the tribulation. So us that are believers, accept Christ as our Savior, if the rapture happened right now, we would not go through the tribulation. We would be taken up, called up with Jesus, and then there would be a 7-year tribulation, and then Jesus would return, and then there would be a 1,000-year reign, a millennial reign on the earth. This is biblical prophecy. I did not make this up. I'm quoting the Bible. There's a lot of confusion as far as whenever people talk about the second coming of Christ, the second advent. The first advent was at Christmas, whenever Jesus came in the form of a babe. And you celebrate that. If you go to a more formal church, you might have an advent calendar, lighting of the candles and that sort of thing. In fact, I think of in Kernersville, I think it's a Methodist church that has a huge wreath out front, and they have large candles, and they light the candles leading up to Christmas as far as the first advent, recognizing it. The second advent is not at the rapture. People think about that, and they think, well, but basically Jesus will come to earth, physically land on earth. The rapture, he basically calls us up to him. He does not land on earth. So that's something right there that's it's not, you see a difference as far as the rapture and the second coming. So Jesus lands on earth on the second coming, at the end of the tribulation, at the end of the 7 years. Rapture is first. What we're going to be looking at now is talking about the second coming of Christ at the end of the tribulation. And so if you look at this, If anyone tells you then, see, here is the Messiah, or over there, do not believe it, for many false messiahs and prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders and lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I've told you in advance. So he's giving a warning that during the tribulation, there's going to be basically, God's going to step back from the earth. Satan's going to be in control. There's going to be so many things that are going to be happening. A lot of people are going to be fooled. Went and saw a movie last night, had a lot of different types of supernatural things in it that could happen. And I know it's just science fiction, but a lot of people see that as, okay, well, and whenever things get strange or whatever, that's my hint, they might believe in other forms of what they feel are truth, things that could easily be explained or whatever they've seen on the screen, whether it's in their hand or on the movie theater. So there's going to be a lot of misinformation. There's already a lot out there. You've had other people like David Koresh down in Waco, Texas. What happened with that, where he said he was the Messiah. And you had the Heaven's Gate cult, where they worshipped one of the comets, and then they basically committed suicide. It's wild how people will fall for these false messiahs. Jim Jones, and it wasn't Kool-Aid, but it was a drink that they mixed in. I read a documentary about it. It wasn't Kool-Aid, but it was some kind of drink that they committed mass suicide. It was, and they believed in the wrong Messiah. So Jesus is saying there's going to be many false people that are going to pop up during the tribulation. And again, we are not in the tribulation. It may feel like it sometimes, but we're not. I really don't believe we are. Matthew 24, verses 26 through 29, Jesus goes on to talk about this, how people are going to have just this disinformation. So if they tell you, see, he is in the wilderness, don't go out, or see, he is in the storerooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Earlier today, this is Saturday before Sunday, had the garage door open. I was working on putting back together a motor in one of the cars. And a storm came up, and I was near the window, or near the doorway. It was open, and just a real, lightning hit, and immediately the thunder was so close. There was no delay. It was just pow, So I think about that whenever I read this. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, the vultures will gather. That's gruesome. The other day, speaking of gruesome, I saw. It was a groundhog had been taken out by somebody's car, and it was there on the road, and I saw large birds. And if you've ever been driving and there's vultures on the road, they wait to the very last minute, and they're huge birds. And so, you just drive up and think they'll move, and they do, but last minute. But what Jesus is saying, the world is going to be so bad and so corrupt at this point during the tribulation. It's going to be basically like a carcass, and there's going to be vultures there. Again, gruesome, graphic, yeah. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the stress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not shed its light. The stars will fall away from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. The return of Christ, the second return of Christ, is going to be a massive event. All these things I read to you: darkness of the sky and the daylight, no moon, lots of shooting stars, comets, who knows? It's basically saying there's going to be lots of miraculous signs and wonders that's going to happen. It might be something like the Shekinah glory, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, the star at night and the cloud of fire by day that led the Israelites from Egypt to the Promised Land, possibly something like that. We don't know. There's all kinds of things that can happen, but basically, people are going to know. There's been false messiahs, but nothing like this is going to stand out and get people's attention. And so Matthew 24, verses 30 through 31, and again, this is all after, at the end of the tribulation. The sign of the Son of Man will be appearing in the sky, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. That's where people might think, and theologians have thought possibly this is the Shekinah glory. Is this something that clouds by day, a light by night, basically a fire by night? And so people will see this, the coming of the clouds. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet. They will gather his elect from the four winds, from the end of the sky, from one end to the other. So whenever Jesus returns to the earth after the tribulation, he's going to come with his saints. And that's what this passage is saying, that he's basically, the elect is another term for his saints that he's going to have, that he's going to bring. And so, again, and we're going to look in Matthew 24, the rest where it talks about fig tree and timing and those sort of things. But one of the biggest things I want you to take away from this lesson, there's a lot of confusion about the second coming. It's not the rapture. The second coming of Christ is at the end of the tribulation. You have the rapture of the saints, 7 years, and then you have the tribulation. You have the rapture, 7 years tribulation, and then you have the second coming of Christ at the end of those 7 years. Hope that made sense. Please look at Matthew 24 and read up. We will look at this next week. Again, thank you, and we will see you tomorrow. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. Thanks.